Pretty soon, another election will be upon us where housing will remain a critical issue. Today, we'll speak with Josh Kraft, who's running for mayor of Boston. Mr. Kraft has been in the nonprofit sector for many years, leading organizations such as the Boys and Girls Club of Boston and the charitable arm of the New England Patriots, which his family owns. Among our other panelists, we'll be joined by media personality Mike Urban, who hosts The Mike Urban Show, in addition to news reporter Scott Van Voorhees, who edits the independent newspaper Contrarian Boston. It's important to remember that as an organization, SPOA does not endorse political candidates. Therefore, this conversation is not an endorsement of Mr. Kraft's campaign by SPOA. However, SPOA extends an open invitation to all candidates who wish to discuss their housing views with us, whether they're running for mayor or any other office. We bring you this information for educational purposes, but it remains up to you, the voters, to decide the merits of the candidates' positions. We facilitate these conversations so that our members can get to know the candidates and so that the candidates can get to know our members. Once you've finished viewing this episode, you can feel free to contact us to share your thoughts about Mr. Kraft's presentation, which begins now. Hello, everyone. My name is Amir Shahsavari. I'm the Vice President of the Small Property Owners Association, also known as SPOA, which brings you episode 15 of SPOA Housing Policy Series. This is where we discuss property rights, housing policy, and all things real estate. I'm happy to welcome Mr. Josh Kraft, who's running for mayor of Boston. Mr. Kraft, thank you for joining us today.
Amir, thank you so much for having me and for the opportunity.
Mr. Chris Lehman is the Chief Information Officer for the Small Property Owners Association. We also owe Chris a debt of gratitude for facilitating Mr. Kraft's participation today. So, Chris, I want to thank you for that, and I also want to thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Amir. Happy to help out and happy to make this happen.
Mr. Demetrius Salpaglu is the CEO of Boston Pads. He's also been a fairly regular panelist on this program since it began. Demetrius, it's great to have you back.
Great to be back, and I'm looking forward to this.
Of course. Mr. Mike Urban is a media personality who has extensive experience in real estate. He's also the host of the Mike Urban Show. Thank you for joining us, Mike.
Thank you for having me.
And Mr. Scott Van Voorhees is the editor-in-chief and founder of Contrarian Boston. He's been a trailblazer in independent journalism. Scott, it's great to have you.
Thanks for having me.
Even though we are a big tent organization that represents the rights of all property owners, SPOA primarily champions the small mom and pop business owners who provide 65% of the housing in Boston and throughout Massachusetts. These are the people who own businesses that are female, minority, and family owned. By virtue of being small business owners, we also take pride in being more accessible to our tenants and forming closer relationships with them. Historically, SPOA was founded in 1987 when a group of small owners came together in their effort to overturn rent control because they had serious problems with that policy as it existed at the time. And in 1994, they succeeded in leading the effort to overturn rent control at the ballot box. The policy created many problems. It made it difficult for owners to collect their hard-earned rental income. It led to the disrepair of housing. It led to the reduced supply of housing, which drove prices up for everybody. It also made it difficult to remove non-compliant tenants, not only to the detriment of the owners and their properties, but also to the many other tenants who depended on people like us to provide them with safe, maintained places to call home. And since then, the people in the areas that were thought to support the policy, eventually over time, once they had a chance to see what life was like after rent control ended, they did not support it any longer. The city of Cambridge is one example where in 2003, the people had the opportunity to vote on rent control again, to send a city petition to Beacon Hill to renew it. And the petition got defeated by an overwhelming margin of 61% to 39%. And so now we are in the face of a housing dilemma where tenants are concerned about rising rents, property owners are concerned about rising operating costs, and unfortunately, we're in a situation now where people are polarized. And so at SPOA, while we respect tenant rights, we also want to be a voice for property owners to have their concerns heard so that we can create a level playing field for all stakeholders in housing. And that's why it's important to donate to our organization. You can do this by going to spoa.com/join. That's www.spoa.com/join. We're a group of volunteers. We work very hard to bring you programming like this. We bring you monthly newsletters of our own. We testify at government hearings on your behalf to promote reasonable housing policies. We also publish articles of our own in the media. In the past, we've given interviews with print and TV media, and we hope to continue doing that. But we can't do it without your help. So please remember to donate at spoa.com/join. And with that, I will introduce Mr. Josh Kraft again. It's great to have you. Would you like to tell us a little bit about yourself and why you're running for mayor?
Definitely. Thank you for the opportunity, Amir, and thank you to everyone at SPOA for having me today. Yeah, so briefly, look, 35 years ago, I made a conscious decision, and the decision was not to go to work in the family business, but instead to do community work. So for the past 35 years, I've worked in and around the communities of Boston and greater Boston. And through that time, I've learned to not only love the city of Boston, but what I've loved the most about it are the people, the thousands of people I've been honored to work with, and most importantly, listen to and learn from. And it truly has shaped the way I manage and the way I lead anything and everything that I'm involved with. Currently, I feel as if the city is headed in the wrong direction. I believe that the current mayor and her administration value political ideology and her own future political career more than she values and her administration values getting things done for the people of the city. What I've learned in my 35 years of community work is that the way to get things done is to listen to people, learn from people, especially people that may not agree with me or strongly disagree with me. Bring those folks together and then, or have the political will to bring those folks together and figure out practical decisions and results that benefit, in this case, the people of Boston. And that's what I would bring to the city as mayor. And currently, as I mentioned, in my opinion, the city is headed in the wrong direction. Housing is unaffordable and unattainable. Families are pulling their kids out of the public schools in record numbers. Mass and Cass has gone from mass and Cass to spread throughout many neighborhoods in the city. There is limited or no fiscal responsibility to the municipal budget. The election department is in federal receivership, and our streets are congested with hastily laid, poorly planned bike lanes that are not only impacting pedestrians and drivers and bikers, but small businesses as well. And the way I lead, as I mentioned, by listening to everyone, bringing folks together to make tough decisions that will provide results for the people of Boston, is how I will address these issues. And again, my administration will be about the core services of city government: streets, housing, public safety, schools, and putting the people first and what they need first before my political ideology.
Well, thank you very much for that introduction. The first question we have is from a SPOA member who is curious about your rent control policy and about housing affordability in general. He writes, How can you, in any form, support rent control? It has shown to be a killer of any new apartment construction. The only way to lower rents in Boston is massive amounts of new apartments in every neighborhood in the city. How do you feel about that? And is there anything that differentiates your version of rent control from what we saw in the past?
Yeah, thank you, Amir. So let me start, and I'm going to talk about my rent control plan. But before I do, I'm going to start and say I am firmly opposed to government mandated rent control and price control. I know I know the negative impact they have on cities and economic vitality of cities. So my rent control program is an opt-in program for landlords. And what it is if a landlord decides to get involved with our rent control programs, they will commit to keeping their rents of their units at minimal increases over a 10-year period. In exchange, they will receive a 20% tax rebate at the end of the year. And in addition, our program is opt-in. It is not government mandated. And our program can help people that can't afford rents in the city. The mayor's program, government mandated, that will never get passed, nor should it, does not help anyone. And in my travels throughout the city, I've heard from everyone. The number one issue is the cost of living, and specifically the cost of housing. And folks that want to live here in the city, that want to raise their kids, work and live in the city of Boston, are struggling to do it. I'm hopeful that my approach to rent control will provide the stability and predictability that those people deserve. Yeah, I know in the end, the way out of a housing crisis is to build more housing. Availability equals affordability. But I also hope my rent control program can support those that also want to stay in the city, because it will not only benefit renters and landlords, but also the city. And it's a great public-private partnership between all of us.
Some of our members recall the days when they had to deal with draconian rent control boards that were very
Yeah,
hostile towards them.
understood.
Understood. Yeah, for example, if they wanted to make a repair, and even when the tenants agreed with the repairs, when they went forward to request very modest rent increases, they would be denied, they would be bullied, they would be threatened with the prospect of having their rents canceled altogether. And they did cancel the rent, and they blocked evictions for the worst types of tenants who should have been evicted, who ended up staying in place for a very long time. So if we think that evictions take too long today, back then, during the rent control era, they were practically impossible. When it came to, let's say, making minor repairs for minor code violations in a basement, there was one instance where a rent control board ordered the property owner to literally lift the foundation of the building all the way up in the air. I mean, just
Wow.
very serious abuses of authority. I guess the question is what this member wants to know, under your version, if implemented, would owners have to face these types of tribunals?
No, our program, there'll be no rent control oversight boards or committees. What we will do is the folks that opt into the program, and Chris Lehman and the folks at Groma have run the numbers and said they would opt into the program. But whether it's Groma and what other landlords or businesses that own a number of units, there will be a website. That's how you access the program, where renters and landlords, tenants and landlords will see the opportunities over a website, and that's how the program will live, and that's how the program will work, and that's how we will get landlords and tenants connected. There will be no oversight board.
I see. And one more question before I turn it over
Sure.
to Chris. There is a question we have here about bringing property owners, especially small business owners, to the table to talk to other stakeholders when policy issues come to the forefront. We know that in the current administration, City Life Vita Urbana is often put out there as a resource for tenants to give them advice, but you never hear about the Small Property Owners Association being put out there as a resource for owners. But in any case, when issues come up, when task forces come up, do you envision during your administration an opportunity for these owners to have an equal voice at the table with everyone else, including those who represent renters, the tradespeople? And I know you've spoken to this, but is there a specific way where you would try to encourage these owners to come to the table? What would it specifically look like, in other words?
So Amir, 100%, it's the way I've done everything. And, my opening remarks, I talked about listening to everyone, learning from everybody. The only way we can move forward, the only way we are going to be able to get more housing built, the only way we're going to be able to control rents and provide uh, pathways for people to live here in the city and make the city affordable is by bringing all parties to the table and giving them an equal voice and the ability to share their thoughts. As I said, for me in the past, having people that don't necessarily agree with me is the way I have learned the most and moved forward the most. And the city that I envision, the administration that I envision is a city of transparency and openness where everybody will have a voice at the table.
Thank you. Chris, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Amir. Thanks, Josh. And yeah, so definitely want to reiterate what Josh said here. And I guess first, just in case it's helpful for members or other viewers who are watching, some background on GROMA and how we're involved here. GROMA is a owner and operator of small multifamily rental properties in the Boston area, most of which are in the city of Boston itself. We have mostly triple deckers in our portfolio, kind of serving the middle of the market, 80 to 20% AMI. And that's one piece of context. The other piece of context is we're very strongly against mandatory rent control. Whether it was the Wu administration policy that was proposed a few years ago, or some of the bills that are in the State House right now, we don't like mandates. We don't like controlled prices by the government. But in our conversations with Josh and his team, it's become very clear that that's just not what this is. And so we then approach the question of, is this something we would be interested in for our properties? Would it make sense to enroll them given that it's voluntary? And so I and my co-founder Seth and our acquisitions team went through a really rigorous modeling process of how does the rent growth cap that people can opt into compare against the tax abatement you would get and the other components of the policy. We ran the numbers through a bunch of different scenarios, and really what we ended up coming out to is the financial impact on properties in a narrow sense is pretty minimal. We saw really only 1 basis point, so 1/100th of a percentage point of a change in performance, which is so small as to be kind of meaningless and within error bounds. And so given that it's financially basically a wash for us, it's kind of just a straightforward yes from the perspective of maintaining positive relationships with our renters specifically, but then also with the city. You have lower turnover, you have easier spending on borrowing costs. There's all kinds of benefits you get from this, both financial and just in terms of the goodwill it creates. And so, we are, I guess another thing I should mention, a totally for-profit company, right? There's not any kind of strings attached that we have in terms of below market rates. We're not making a play on that front. This is really just purely, does it make sense as a profit-oriented business for us to enroll in this? And we straightforwardly would. So given that, we think this is a good way in conjunction with other policies, which I'm sure we'll talk about in a moment, that are geared towards increasing the supply of housing in Boston to make Boston a more affordable city for renters.
Thank you, Chris. I'll turn it over to anyone else who has a question or a comment about this rent control policy.
I had a quick question. Why call it rent control? I think it's such a loaded phrase, and I hear what you're saying. Like you're not going to have rent control board. You're not. It's really a tax program, right? A voluntary tax program. But aren't you like running the risk of kind of angering some of your potentially core supporters? And then what you said, it's not rent control. So you have Wu on the other hand saying, oh, it's not really rent control. So you're probably not going to convince other people that it's the kind of rent control that the advocates want, which is like having a rent board, and that's what they want, right? So why
Yeah,
call it like rent support or something? I don't know. And then, is there yeah,
no,
I mean, I guess just I just wondered about that.
yeah, thank you, Scott. Look, not all rent control is government mandated, and at its core, this program is rent control. It's keeping rents at minimal increases over X amount, 10 years, so that in the end, the purpose of rent control, even government mandated, which we're all opposed to, is to create opportunity to help people that want to, afford, apartments or units or houses wherever they're living. And so at its core, this really is rent control because it's keeping rents at livable levels for a lot of folks in the city. And that's what it is at its core. It's similar to Mayor Wu's, except it's not government mandated. It's landlord opted in. It can help people. Mayor Wu knew when she talked about her rent control prompts that she knew it would never get approved by the legislature, but she talked about it, and then it was easy to point her finger at the legislature. We've dug in, done the work, done the research, found that this is rent control. It's just a creative way to do it. And, I want to really talk about, too, the website that's going to create, it's a lot easier than the rent, that Amir was talking about, the rent oversight board. Really going to be an easier way for tenants to connect with landlords. It's also going to cut out fees as well for folks. So, but at its core, it's rent control. It's helping people and it's helping landlords. And, one of the things that's very important to me through my time at Boys and Girls Club was all about partnership. Bringing, our greatest partner was one of them was the Boston Police Department. And public-private partnership is really the way to move forward. And this is a public-private partnership that is rent control that can help people, help landlords, and help make our city more vibrant. I mean, we do not want to price people out of the city of Boston. And we know that until we get housing built, it's going to become just the city of people that can afford to live here, which is people of wealth. And one of the great things about cities is the diversity of people in them and the vibrancy and the new ideas and the sense of community that can move everybody forward. And that's why housing is so crucial. So sorry, I got on the soapbox a little.
Thanks.
So we have a question from a SPOA member who's wondering if you're going to ensure transparency in the business practices and committee formations within the city. And she's also curious to see if you're intending to create fair housing policies that take into account the needs of small property owners. For example, one concern is that the Inspectional Services Department has been weaponized to bring harm to small owners. And this is a means by which eviction processes are often delayed longer than they should be. Do you have any comment?
Yeah, and probably going to be a bit of a long answer. I hope that's okay. But Amir,
Fine.
I'll start with the first item, and I know I referenced it a little earlier in this discussion. One of the reasons I want to be your next mayor of the city of Boston is that I know we need more transparency and more consistency in all city government, not just with ISD and this decisions that are made about small property and housing, et cetera. So I will promise you that's what our administration will be transparent, will be consistent, and again, will bring as many voices to the table as we can. In terms of inspectional services, I know, we just had an event, about 100 small property owners, builders in South Boston. And the number one concern we kept hearing about was the inconsistencies and I'd say inefficiencies of ISD, as well as zoning and the incompetence of a lot of the people running these organizations and making decisions that impact all of you and your members. The head of ISD was a political appointment, someone with no experience, no certifications to run the department, and no experience in the department. I can tell you that one of our first jobs when we get into office will be to return the institutional knowledge to a number of offices at City Hall. And I think ISD is probably at the top of the list because we know how it's ground things to a halt. At that event with 100 folks, we heard about someone who wanted to build a new bedroom, and it took over almost a year to get it done. We've heard that refusal letters used to come under Mayor Menino and Mayor Walsh in 3 to 4 days. Now it comes on the 30th day, the last day, and that just tells you the glut that you're all dealing with. So we will get institutional knowledge back in that department and make it more efficient. And then in terms of tenant, and the last part was about tenant and landlord around evictions. And look, I know that that's a state and there's a lot of rules and regulations that are tied up in the state and federal government. But I assure you, I want to protect, obviously, tenants, because I know there's some bad tenants. But I also want to protect landlords. And I know there are some landlords, not any of you, that don't do the right thing. So I would work with everyone at the table to make sure all the voices are heard and all the groups are protected. But again, about bringing folks to the table that represent each and every one of the constituents and stakeholders.
I appreciate that. And of course, at SPOA, we do promote good practices among rental property owners. It's not a us versus them game. It is about creating that level playing field. Thank you, Mr. Kraft. I'll turn it now to Demetrius.
Hey, how are you?
Good, Demetrius. How you doing? And Amir, you can call me Josh. You don't have to call me.
Well, now that I have your permission, I'll call you Josh.
That's perfect.
There's so much to cover. I'll try to keep it brief. I think the first thing as far as bike lanes go, I think that they were, hastily implemented, and there's just parts of the city that are just a downright disaster. And I actually think it's created more traffic. And if the goal was to reduce the carbon footprint, it's done the exact opposite. There's no question about that. So hopefully we can, tackle that and bring some sanity back to the city and less traffic congestion. The other thing that I noticed that I'd be interested in hearing your opinion on is, I think people come to Boston and they see, there's high paying jobs. And, I think that there's a general understanding that taxes are pretty high here across the board. And I think the expectation with high taxes is high quality of life and quality of living. And I've seen, it seems, anyways, for me, that there's more potholes than ever. And I see a lot of graffiti like rearing its ugly head everywhere. And I think that somewhat plays into the strength of, Boston not being as, it could be a lot better. And I'm a little bit concerned that I'm seeing, when you see a lot of graffiti and you see a lot of potholes, is it tarnishing our image of Boston? What could we do to, improve that? And then, I know I have a lot to unpack. I'd also like to talk with you at some point about the broker bill and how it would affect the real estate community, including small landlords. So I don't know, maybe we could start with one or two of those and unpack it as we go in our podcast.
Okay, great. Thanks, Mitch. So bike lanes first. I think you hit on it. They've become a quality of life issue. Over the last 3 years, Mayor Wu and the administration have focused their time on hastily installing poorly planned bike lanes with zero community impact or feedback on them. And the results, as you said, Demetrius, are clogged streets, hard for families, senior citizens to move or walk around on. It's actually not great for bikers. I'll tell you a story. Will Kaiser was on me. We were at an event in the Back Bay, and a gentleman who is a daily avid biker, like a crazy, a real biker, he said to me, I woke up one day and there was a bike lane on the street outside my window. And I looked, I said, that's the worst place for a bike lane. Why would they put it there? And I've heard that from other biking folks as well. And they were hastily installed, poorly planned. In fact, when we go back to political hires, I know the person who was chief of streets has no background in running streets. This gets to your pothole question, Demetrius, too. They have an IT background. So I have no idea why they're in this position. It just speaks to a bigger issue that I'm sure you've all heard about, I've heard about, is that this administration doesn't take feedback, especially if it goes against what they're thinking is best for the city. And funny enough, after my announcement of running for mayor and saying I was going to pause all new bike lanes and figure out, do some planning and thoughtful data recording and speaking to neighbors to figure out the best way. I'm not against them. We just need to do it the right way. But after we said that, the mayor did a 30-day review of all bike lanes, and there's a report out where she basically says we didn't listen. So I know it's all, from what I've been told, to $100+ million to install these bike lanes. It's, again, we can get to fiscal responsibility eventually. Second question around potholes and streets. I just don't think those kind of services are a priority. And in my opinion, that's one of the core responsibilities of its municipal government. And that's what the people in the city have been used to under Mayor Menino and Mayor Walsh. Get the streets smooth, respond to people. The graffiti, I know one of the folks on our team came from the Menino administration. He was with Mayor Menino for 21 years, Michael Knievi, and he said they had a whole graffiti response team. I'm not going to say it's not there anymore, but I will go back to how they dealt with graffiti and what Michael and that planning on how to deal with graffiti. Because I agree with you. These are quality of life. You know, it's what you see every day when you're walking to work or walking your child to school or just on a Saturday walking through the Boston Common. It's got to be quality of life is crucial to me, will be crucial to me as the mayor of the city. The last one, the broker, if you could just elaborate a little more and I can talk about it.
Well, you know, it's an interesting and slightly controversial subject where there's legislation out there to essentially try to get more of the landlords to pay a broker's commission. Right. And I think it all ties back to, there's a huge distraction I think people want authenticity in government at all levels, state, local, federal. And I think that, I just got off the phone. I'll tie this together so it makes sense because it won't at first. But I just got off the phone with the landlord that just got back from Austin, Texas. And he said that they are offering 4 months free rent when you rent in some of the new construction buildings out there. Now, here's what we know in Texas. They've put this out there in Austin. The rents went down by 22% because they built 25,000 units twice in the last 2 years. And so if you think about it, they have the exact opposite of a supply. Now, some of the landlords might be petrified to hear if we had that much, inventory. But what a beautiful thing it would be if we could do half of that or something like that. I think that there's a lot of, and I hate the word virtue signaling, but it seems like the different people put out distractions instead of focusing on the root cause of the problem, which is a lack of supply. And then all these other ancillary things pop up. Now you're blaming the real estate community. You're blaming real estate agents. You're creating, and then techopolies can come in and kind of have their will and, have, these gorgeous lobbyists go up on Beacon Hill and try to pass legislation that may not be good to local real estate agents and a loss of jobs. There's no economic impact studies. And so I know that's more of a statement than it is a question, right. But it speaks to supply. And so, I really appreciate the fact that you're talking about supply and what, I guess the question would be wrapped into that on a scale of 1 to 10, looking at, say, voluntary rent control versus, supply, what would you give supply on a scale of 1 to 10 versus voluntary rent control vis-a-vis how much time and effort you would put into something?
In terms of the broker fee, that's something I have not, I don't know all the facts on both sides, so I don't want to comment on it. Of course, I'm going to go to the big picture and I'm going to go to our housing, the other parts of our housing plan, which will address that. The big picture, and you just said it to me, just talking about we need more housing. The big picture way out of any housing issue, lack of housing or high rent, is build more housing. Availability equals affordability. So there's actually three parts to our initial housing plan. First, we've talked about the rent control program. The second is we know that there's 26,000 units of permanent housing sitting on the sideline that can't get into the ground because of regulatory issues, because of the inefficiencies at ISD. So first day in office, we're going to pull in the people that are sitting on those, and we're going to figure out a way to fast track those projects and get them moving, get them into the ground to get housing built, because that's the number one way to get us out of this crisis, this looming crisis, I'd say. Also, with those 26,000 units, we know there's roughly $100 to $125 million tax revenue that would come in with that. We would use a portion of that for the 20% tax rebates on the rent control program, but we'd also take a portion of those tax revenues and create a first-time home buyer program that includes people, working folks, because throughout so many neighborhoods, I have heard, whether it's Mattapan, Charlestown, West Roxbury, Eastie, the same thing. I raised my kids here. They really want to raise their kids here. They cannot afford to buy a house. And these are people, working people, from police officers to city workers, et cetera. So those are the three components of our housing. But, getting those 26,000 units jump started, we will get our hands into that day one.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
I'll turn it over to Mike Urban.
Josh,
Mike,
what's up, buddy? How are you?
I'm great.
Good. I'm happy you're here. So one of the questions that I had is that the office space vacancy rate in Boston, it keeps on trickling up year after year. And the Small Business Association, obviously, recently moved out of Boston. How could we come to terms with, promoting more business and more office space and more opportunities for business owners to open up in the city and thrive, and not only open, but remain opened as well?
So thank you, Mike, for the question. Probably don't have specifics, but I've gotten this question, and it's sort of the same answer for getting those 26,000 units that are permanent and can't get built. We need to bring businesses here. Obviously, we know we are looming. The next couple of years, it doesn't matter who the mayor of the city is. We have tough times coming down the line with $1 billion shortfall over the next 5 years, and we're all gonna have to work together to get through it. And everything's on the table to get through that. And one of the things that's on the table is incentivizing businesses to come into the city of Boston. And however that, whether it's through taxes, whether it's through programs for young professionals, what have you, we need to incentivize and excite people, make it exciting for folks to want to bring their business to Boston. And that also includes, we got to have housing for young people. So that's really my answer to that, Mike, is it's up to the mayor. And I think that's true of mayors in any city. You got to attract the business. You got to open up the door and find creative ways, as I mentioned, the tax deferrals or what have you, or whatever, to get businesses in here, to create jobs, to create tax revenue, to create pathways for philanthropy. They are crucial parts of a city. And that will be another thing day one will be focused on as well.
Yeah, I think it's important because the businesses will bring people in to the city, but we simultaneously have to have units available for people to buy as well, right?
Exactly.
We need to start building. I think it's super important because it's the trend that I'm concerned with, right? Which you mentioned the tax situation. So you've
Yeah.
been opposed, as I have, to Michelle's, trying to impose a higher tax on commercial properties. As you know, commercial properties are selling from anywhere to 35 to 50% below fair market value. I mean, some buildings are selling for half of what they were selling for back in 2018 and 2019. Uh, how could we, what's your approach to the tax situation that's happening in Boston? What's your plan?
So my first plan, Mike, and um, before I would ever, as mayor, before I would ever talk about a excuse me, or residential tax rate, I would look at the city budget and find savings in the city budget.
Hmm.
When the mayor was working on this home rule petition with the commercial versus residential taxes, whatever it was, 5, 6, 7 months ago, the direct quote was, there's nothing to be cut. I think she said not a penny to be cut out of our budget, $4.6 billion. So to me, that's not only hard to believe, it's disrespectful to the people in the city that are making hard fiscal choices every single day in their own lives and their families' lives. So before I ever considered, or my administration ever considered, taxes, changing the tax rate, home rules for commercial, we would look hard, and not only look, we would find savings within our own budget. It's just the responsible thing to do.
Hmm.
Even in years where it's not bad, hopefully, you got to do that.
Yeah.
On top of that, you all saw this. Everybody saw this. Doesn't even matter what side, political side you're on. Everybody knew post-COVID that we were heading into some tough times, and it was eventually going to catch up to us. And when the current administration was confronted with it, they said, oh, they're, by Boston Policy Institute, they just said, oh, they're overblowing the numbers. It's not going to be that bad. Then this past week, the Wall Street Journal confirmed it. And we have really, really hard times coming to the city of Boston. No, doesn't matter who the mayor is. We're all going to have to work together to get through it. And I know we will. We'll be stronger on the other side. As mayor, I'll work with anyone and everyone and all the parties to address the revenue issues, to find savings, the revenue issues that will be, that are results of the buildings losing value. And to me, I'll work with all parties involved, and we'll put everything on the table and figure out the way to get this city through these tough times that are definitely coming. And we'll, again, be stronger when we come out the other side. But I wish that over the last few years, preparations had been taken for this instead of committing it's now $140 million for a stadium that primarily benefits a private entity. And Lowell's Colley Stadium was rebuilt for $8 million, strictly for the use of high school kids.
Yeah, I don't disagree. The sins of what happened in the past are going to catch up, and they are catching up to us now, because the comparables that close today for 35 or 50% less is going to be troublesome in the future when they go for those to try to collect those taxes. One last question. There's a lot of push, it seems, to convert, let's say, office space buildings that are maybe not occupied anymore into residential space. And I agree with that to a point. But what happens is a lot of the people that are within the neighborhood, a lot of times they give you a lot of pushback. They don't want more. This is the conundrum, right? Where people want more housing, they just don't want it in their backyard, right?
Yeah.
And I think what we really need to do is, we have to get to a point where a lot of people, and this is just based on my feedback from my audience, whenever I do a video about housing and supply and demand, there's this disconnect where people just don't understand that, you can't have it both ways. You can't have, let's say, affordable housing and not simultaneously build more housing to make housing affordable. So it's crazy. So I guess two questions. So Michelle Wu increased the amount of affordable units that need to be built. And she also decreased the amount, I believe, from like 10 to 7 units or something, where a builder, right, has to make affordable units. And anybody else that's part of this, is probably know where I'm going with this. Like, to a point, I feel like the more affordable units that have to be built, which I'm not saying there should not be affordable units, but across the board, everything should be affordable, in my opinion. Everything should be affordable. The more
Like
affordable
Austin,
units,
Texas.
yes, everything that when you impose affordable units to developers or people that are doing these major projects, it inherently increases the fair market value of the fair market value units because they're trying to make up for that loss, let's say. Is there anything that you could do in order to potentially decrease the amount of affordable units that has to be built? Is that a good idea? Is it a bad idea?
Well, I look at that IDP number, the affordable unit requirement. It's a fungible, movable number based on the economic environment. And right now, the economic environment we're in, 20%, and it's not, and even getting worse because of the, I'm pointing towards Washington, D.C., with the tariffs, we all know that building and housing materials are just going to get jacked up more. So if you're going to keep a high affordable rate, the 17 plus the 3 for the federal voucher rate, nothing's ever got. It wasn't before the tariffs. It's definitely not post tariff. And you all know as better than I do, 20% of nothing being built is nothing being built. And that's exactly the problem we're talking about. Mm-hmm. So I think IDP anywhere should be a fungible number based on the economic climate, the building material climate, the interest rate climate. And that's how it should be adjusted. So now, frankly, if we want it, we all agree availability equals affordability, we got to lower it down to make it financially feasible to get housing built. Because the more housing built, availability equals affordability. In the downtown housing, I just want to mention with the downtown conversions of office buildings, because of the zoning, because of a lot of those issues, it's really hard. I know they're talking a lot about it. The mayor and her administration, and they're giving tax abatements and et cetera. But in the end, it's just a small amount of units because of the zoning. Again, you probably all know this better than me. Narrow staircases, a window in every bedroom, plumbing for bathrooms up and down a building. I actually think, and I've never run the number, you probably have run the numbers, all of you, that taking down buildings and then rebuilding a housing building, probably more cost effective and more impactful.
Thank you, Josh.
Thank you.
Josh, on the subject of taxes, it's been brought to our attention that the city of Boston has been taxing lower value properties at a higher rate and higher value properties at a lower rate. This has been referred to as vertical inequity. I don't know if you've heard of this before, but what are your thoughts on that? And could there be a way to investigate and reform that practice?
I've heard about it. Amir, I haven't heard seen numbers, spreadsheets, but I've heard about it anecdotally. It was this past weekend. I was at an event in Dorchester, big fun social event. I was working the event, but someone had told me that their parents' home had been assessed with a $750,000 increase in 1 year. These are people living on a fixed income. But I think it's answering your question, but I don't know the details. But someone like 2 streets over, they lost value in their house, similar type house. So I don't know why that's happening. I don't know enough about it, but I've heard about it anecdotally.
And if I could chime in here, because this is something that we have a lot of experience with. We have a large portfolio of small properties, and we're very attuned to what the valuations that the city issues do to our tax bills. And so, we have a really great acquisitions team. They do a lot of diligence on pushing back where appropriate, right? If we think the city has done something to overvalue unfairly one of our properties, we have a really well thought out playbook for demonstrating why that's incorrect. And I'm sure the same is true for owners of huge office buildings or huge residential towers. But if you're talking about a mom and pop landlord, they may not have the sophistication to be able to put together a really methodical argument that will persuade the city to change its valuation. And my guess is that's probably what's happening, right? The city is desperate for revenue because of irresponsible spending and is trying to push up everyone's taxes wherever they can. And, if you're going to try to do that to a big corporation, the corporation has the know-how and the bandwidth to push back. But if it's somebody's, elderly parent on a fixed income, are they going to be able to do that? Probably not. And so this reflects, I think, a need to change how the city's looking for revenue, which is, I think, a big problem with the financial situation the city's put itself in so far.
We did a lot of focus groups and research and my discussions with people. It's separate from the tax issue, but maybe indirectly related. One of the biggest needs in the city now, as much as affordable or more than affordable, is workforce housing. And a lot of folks, as I've mentioned, that want to live here, work here, raise their kids here, can't afford to live here. And I think we should all keep that in mind.
Right. I have one more housing related question, but before I go there, does anybody, I think, Josh, if you have another 10 minutes to stay, does anybody have anything they want to ask about crime, education, or the cost of energy? I'll give the floor to you guys if you want to cover any of those three areas.
I could ask a question in regards to that. Yeah, so most new units that are being built, and this may scale even beyond the question of being mayor of Boston, but obviously the cost of energy is astronomical, and a lot of new units that have to be built, what is happening is they are creating this system where they're going to be even, but beyond the tariffs, okay? Tariffs aside, the material that has to be used in order to get to this, like, not that we have to go down this rabbit hole, but this net zero carbon. I mean, I just don't know what the future holds, because on one hand, we want to build more units and make them affordable. But on the other hand, on a state level, they're making it increasingly more expensive to actually do that. And everything is going to be electric. And look, I'm for renewables. I just think the technology is not there in terms of heating right now. But I think it's going to be a little bit difficult if they impose these things on these developers. The costs are just going to go up astronomically. I'm not sure how we could simultaneously have affordable housing on the front end, which is, let's say, selling or listing a unit for a homeowner to buy, but on the back end, increased the costs because of these things that are going on. I mean, I just think it's crazy.
Yeah, it's funny, Mike. One of the unions we were in front of, and I won't say which one, they talked about how going from limited net carbon green energy to all the way to the other side. I'll just say 100%. I'm really simplifying it here. Said it doesn't make it easy to build. It doesn't make it, we can't get in the buildings. We can't get we can't even get in those buildings because it's so expensive. We can't get the rates. We can't be paid the way we can. We can't get the our insurance. So it's actually something that should be done in a step-by-step way, this conversion to the net carbon and green renewable energy. Instead of going from none to everything, you got to do it in a gradual way that brings developers, builders, and along slowly so they can start to adjust to it, understand it, and figure out the most efficient ways economically to make it happen.
I have one more question. I'll leave it to other people. So a lot of the crime, Michelle's always on here talking about, we're the safest major city. But what she fails to explain is that if you look at New England as a whole, we are definitely, in terms of, safeness, I don't necessarily think that's true. Most of the crime that happens in Boston is isolated crime. So what I mean by that is it's not happening throughout all of the city. It's happening in certain neighborhoods within the city. And you would think that if you have that data where crime is happening in certain neighborhoods, that they could send people to those neighborhoods to try to curb some of that crime. And beyond that, it just there's other, maybe not, let's say extremely violent crime where somebody is, dismissing somebody else, but crime is up in general. So do you have a plan in regards to that?
Yeah, and I'd like to do my take on this whole. Yeah, the murder rate is down, which is great. We're all happy about that. It's also down across the country in major cities across the country. But Downtown Crossing had 1,000 violent crimes this past year, the most they've had in 7 years. I've spoken to enough people that the fear of crime and the fear of their own not being safe is palpable and real. And as you mentioned, Mike, random crimes are up. Actually, the last few weekends when it's been nice out, there's been violent shootings every weekend. In fact, and this is just for us here, a volunteer who's going to do signatures for us, he came in on a Thursday, got all the info, was killed over the weekend. He had nothing to, random violence. And that was part of a number of shootings. I think it was 2-3 weekends ago. So to me, I don't listen. I think it's awesome that the murder rate is down. But from my experience in speaking to people, the fear of crime, the fear of safety, they don't want to walk in certain parts of the city in the South End, Downtown Crossing. Parents walk their kids to the school bus now because of people actively using drugs in front of them and so on. So that's where I stand. And I feel like one of the programs, I'm gonna speak a little long, sorry. That's okay. I tell this story. Under Mayor Walsh, there was a gentleman named Dan Mulhern, and he tells me I can tell this story, so I tell it all the time. He was Marty Walsh's director of public safety, and he went to Marty like 10, 11 years ago, said, I have an idea for a program, but your administration will never see the benefit of it, or us. We will never see the benefit. It'll be down the road. And Marty said, do it. Speaks to Marty's character as well. And the program is called Operation Exit. Basically, I was running Boys and Girls Clubs at the time, but I was doing family work as well. And Dan, Commissioner Evans, and some other folks grabbed me. We funded the program. It just got kids that were gang affiliated in prison for violent crimes coming out, got them into union training programs, not just to get jobs, but to get careers that would take them to the middle class. I've met a few now that own houses that I had met with before, now own houses. It's a great program. It's no longer in existence. But I think that might have played a role too in some of those murder numbers, at least. And that's something else. Day one, when we're in office, we will bring that program back.
Is Michelle responsible for eliminating the program?
I don't know if it's her directly. I think her director of public safety knew about the program, but so I don't want to say she said don't do it. I don't want to put that on her, but I know her director of public safety was aware of the program. I've spoken. Few years back, I spoke to him about it.
Policing is down in Boston as well.
Yes.
So it's down by
short cops.
Yes, like by 200, over 200 cops, like 2,100. Yes.
And it's infiltrated up to the detectives. So it's also what it's doing is it's impacting overtime and increasing the budget. And I know when I met with the detectives unions, they talked openly like, we don't want all this overtime. We need more folks on the detectives were down 40, 50, and then the uniformed officers were down significantly more. I don't know what the number was, but I think it's in
It
the
is.
hundreds. And, you saw it at the marathon. I saw more people from non-Suffolk county sheriff's offices, patrolling and working there.
Yeah, we got to do what we can do to try to make it more
We got to
policing,
get,
more
yeah.
active. I mean, it has to happen, right?
I think maybe get creative with
Yes.
the, what am I, the residency requirement till people can afford to live in the city, or until we build more housing and rents go way down. So,
Yeah. Thank you, Josh.
thank you.
And on that note, with regard to housing, Josh, SPOA is working on a statewide bill to help tenants on their pathway to home ownership. And I know you touched on this a little bit earlier. Under this bill, the property owner would take a portion of the rent and put it into special escrow accounts for his or her tenants, and the government would then step in to provide matching funds so that the tenants could make a down payment on a home or a condo. And if you're an owner and if your tenants were not interested, you could then put the money into a general escrow account statewide based on zip code for tenants all over the Commonwealth, including those who happen to live in more vulnerable parts of the state, more vulnerable communities that are economically challenged. So if you think about this in the context of a good landlord bill, at this point, by spreading the generosity forward on a massive scale, on a larger scale, now you're a phenomenal landlord. You're not just a good landlord. And in return for that, the property owner would receive a triple tax benefit. So if the owner puts $300 into the escrow account, the government would give you $900 worth of tax credit. In addition to that, it could be expanded into a package of other owner benefits, including interest-free loans to make repairs on the building, which would also benefit the tenants as well. So in the big picture, what if we could what if we could radically change the way that people view the payment of rent? Because the way I look at it, once tenants understand that by paying rent, they would be paying towards their own future, they might be motivated to collaborate with the property owner and to form stronger relationships with those property owners. And the status of the property owner would also improve because the many good people who are property owners could shed the negative stereotypes that should be done away with permanently. And so, in the process, if people view the payment of rent in that light, paying towards their own futures, as property owners, we could help ourselves while giving them that future on the way to generational wealth. Do you have any opinion about that?
No, look, I don't want to speak. First of all, I have to understand the program a little better, but I
Sure.
love
But in
that.
general,
And I
in general.
speak a lot to folks in the Black and brown communities about that. There's a lot of issues with housing programs that have 50-year deed restrictions. So I love the idea. And Chris, you guys do something similar to that, correct?
It's not exactly that, but we are in the process of developing a product that'll enable renters to build ownership in our ecosystem. It's not available yet. We're still working through the regulatory timeline, but that is a huge goal of GROMA, is to enable renters to become owners. A lot of the paths that are out there right now are really not that well structured from a financial engineering perspective. And so that's been in development for a while. We're actually rolling out a limited release right now for our own employees to test it. And then we expect early next year, we'll have a more broadly available version of it that'll be available to anyone.
Thank you, Chris. I love, I talk a lot about creating generational wealth. I think if we could do that in a real way, in a substantive way, in an impactful way, that's going to get us back on track, especially through the next few years. And I think show people of the city that we're all working together. I love the public-private. That's what I've done my whole life. Public-private partnership to benefit the greater good. That's overall the gist and the direction I try to focus on. The greater good.
Ladies and gentlemen, in addition to thanking Josh and the entire panel, I'd like to remind you to please donate to SPOA at spoa.com/join. That's www.spoa.com/join. As you can tell, you don't have to be a rental housing provider or a business owner of any kind to join us. We welcome anyone and everyone willing to stand up for housing policies that are fair, balanced, and reasonable for all of us. And when I say all of us, I mean all of us. Whether you happen to be a tenant, whether you happen to be a housing provider slash landlord, whether you happen to be one of the tradespeople who works as an electrician, a plumber, or a carpenter, among others, or whether you happen to be one of the people in a variety of other industries who rely upon the hardworking landlord community for housing and for jobs, jobs that make our economy and our communities stronger and safer. In the near future, we'll be back with another episode. Until then, I wish all of you well. I hope that you'll join us. I hope that you'll make a donation, and I thank you very much.